Happy winter, everybody, for the snowbound edition of Hacking TV.
This week, the digital film world joins the celluloid set and heads to Park City for Sundance.
And back east, cable mergers are facing unexpected headwinds.
Verizon keeps trying to talk up its mysterious Go 90 strategy and distract investors from the problems it has with Fios.
And on the deal front, 2 digital sales and Netflix numbers that are getting strangely mixed reviews. I'm Steve Rosenbaum.
And I'm Saul Hansel, and this is Hacking TV.
Hey, Saul, how are you?
Well, I spent all day digging 2 feet of snow from in front of the house at Hacking TV headquarters here in Montclair, New Jersey.
Well done. Bravo. I dug not one bit of snow, but I did think about it.
And the Chinese food appeared on time?
You know, it's funny, I never order delivery on terrible weather days. I feel bad. This is my guilt thing. I instead go to the restaurant and pick up the food myself.
I understand. Well,
but we're not in Park City. Neither of us.
We are not in Park City, and we've both been to Sundance. I went 1 year as a dog and pony for AOL, and you must have been there a bunch of times.
I have a closet full of really cool Sundance hoodies. Yes, I do.
But this year, there's a change, right? So basically, filmmakers would go to Sundance and still do go to Sundance trying to get somebody to buy their indie film that they have like mortgaged their children to go make. And sometimes it's working. But you're noticing a shift in the dynamic. What's different this year?
Well, I have to start with a guilty admission. As both a filmmaker and a distributor for years and years and years, I said in particular to indie doc people, we are right around the corner from this extraordinary moment when digital and the web will connect and all your films will find their audience and you'll all be paid, a couple of bucks per screening. And I had this very deep-seated passion that indie film and the web were going to kind of magically connect and better quality, niche-oriented films would flourish. And for the better part of the last 10 years, that just has turned out to be optimistic fiction, otherwise known as bullshit. This year, for the first time, though, a bunch of things have changed. One is, Netflix has made an absolute undeniable hit out of Making a Murderer. And if you listen to Reed Hastings, or Ted Sarandos talk about it, they both say, there's something fundamentally different about audiences coming to smaller topics kind of on their own terms when they want to watch it. And there's a domino effect, which is you start to hear, hey, there's a film you should check out. And unlike the old world of indie documentaries in particular, where your friends would say, hey, there's this film you should check out. It's at the Angelica. And 2 weekends go by and you go, oh, I'm going to go down and see it. And it's gone already because it got pulled off the screens because it had, it had a good early buzz, but filling those theaters is actually really hard. But there's a very different ramp that's beginning to now happen. And so that the Netflix folks have showed up at Sundance this year empowered by the fact that they can actually take smaller projects and that some of them will reach a larger audience, some of them will take many years. But net, they can make bets that are better for filmmakers and smaller and have a better upside. And now you're seeing Amazon, equally empowered and starting to, bring a checkbook as well. So, I think you're going to see this year with some really interesting deals.
That makes sense. That's great. My fear is 5 years from now, we're back to Shark Week, right? You certainly could say that for the last 25 years, there have been a lot of people buying medium-priced nonfiction video going on to all the, miscellaneous cable channels. But guess what? In that context, when they had to allocate their money, I'm sure everybody tried some high-minded investigative thing, but the Shark Weeks, the reality TVs, what's on cable, and it's hardly the literate, hard-hitting documentary fare of our dreams. So a question is, why is the overall audience, once it moves to on demand, going to be any different in its taste than it was in the 500 cable, channels cable world?
Well, I mean, if you've watched the Netflix, debate, over the ratings that were theoretically leaked, by a television network, I thought that Sarandos' answer was perfectly spot on. He essentially said, who the hell cares what our ratings are? Like, we have subscribers and they pay us $9 a month or $8 a month. And as long as they're happy, they pay us $8 next month. And whether, an edge case film or series or whatever gets seen a gabillion times or 3 times, like, I thought it was fascinating that, the television folks were essentially trying to goad Netflix into admitting its ratings. And Netflix was like, it's just not how they look at the world. It's not about mass audience.
Right. So
Shark Week needs mass.
Well, the question is the dominant model 5 years from now going to be subscription, right? And not advertising. Shark Week is medium size, right? It's not network, CBS scale, but it does need to justify itself in terms of its advertising pull. And so if, 5 years from now, either we're buying a bunch of Hulus or we're buying a bundle, which includes advertising supported channels, they'll have ratings as a key choice indicator. I mean, my guess is we'll have some Netflix and some HBO, but I don't know whether we're going to have lots that are going to be able to just sort of be big enough to spend extra money on something that only a handful of people want. It would be great, but we will see. Right now, but everybody, there's the idealistic phase of a market, and then there is the bean counter phase. And right now we're in the take over the world phase, and everybody is tripping over each other to go buy content. And you've got, Amazon and Netflix and HBO with lots of money. So if I was a filmmaker, sell to them, right? Very, good market.
So I'm puzzled by the headwinds that this charter thing are now facing, and you are better student of the politics of this business than I am. So, like, we were talking about it before we started the podcast. Like, it just seems to me it was kind of a no-brainer. The deal was done. TWC and Charter, I'm trying to figure out where the opposition's coming from, other than Comcast, I guess.
Well, Dish, AT&T. So if you are competing against Time Warner and Charter, so Verizon and AT&T and Dish are direct head-to-head competitors, right? So the last thing you want is for your competitor to have more economies of scale, more marketing muscle, and generally be better. So they're structurally against it, except that they all want to do their mergers. And then there is the public interest types that don't like any concentration of power, who will argue against everything. And there's an argument, that we live in a pretty concentrated world. But then again, the thing about cable, right, is that Charter and Time Warner don't compete with each other at all, right? Because the world has been divided up geographically. And so there aren't any markets in which somebody is going to have the number of choices reduced. And as we talk about on the show every week, the number of choices for where you get your programming is increasing. So the basic rationale that the government would use to throw this out is it's hard. They can, right? They're the government and they can do what they want. And they, Obama administration has been taking a somewhat tougher stance on antitrust in the last couple of years, but I have a hard time seeing how this is going to get derailed.
And then Reed Hastings, who seems to be, the star of this week's episode, came out and basically said he was in favor of Charter Time Warner Cable, which was surprising.
Well, if you happen to run a lot of trucks, the guy who owns the toll roads is someone who you want to be friends with, right? Netflix does not work if its bits can't get to people over Charter and Time Warner's wires. And it's
he was against Time Warner Comcast.
That's all that. Well, in Comcast, remember, if Comcast wasn't also NBC, that might be different, right? Time Warner and Charter don't really own programming assets. Now, Charter is controlled by John Malone, who owns Discovery Network or controls Discovery Networks and a bunch of other programming assets. So you could suggest that they're the same issues, but there is a more interesting antitrust question on whether the people who make the program should own the wires or not. I mean, we've loosely said for the last 25 years in this country, yeah, that's okay. But that is an interesting question. But Reed, look, Reed is political, right? He needs to have allies, right? Increasingly, he wants the cable systems to sell Netflix the way they sell HBO. It doesn't get talked about, but Netflix puts a lot of its own hardware in the head ends of all the cable systems, right? I mean, they need to cooperate with these guys because, 25% of the bandwidth in the universe is consumed by Netflix. So there's a lot of work they have to do together. And maybe even he likes this world of where the big guys get to pay for the fast lane, right? We've talked about that a bunch. But if you're Netflix and you've got a big checkbook, you might well want to buy a little bit of advantage over, somebody's upstart, over-the-top movie service.
So Verizon Hearst, interesting, surprising.
So Verizon, right, keeps trying to say that they want to bet on Go90. And in a very abstract McKinsey sort of way that makes lots of sense. For the same reason that, Comcast wants to own Time Warner, right? So Verizon owns the number one cell phone network and a perfectly good regional, fiber optic broadband system. And so they own pipes. They want to make content so that they can bundle it all together and make profits in all the different ways. And somebody says, well, the future isn't linear TV, it's mobile on demand, so let's build a mobile on demand thing. And how are we going to do that? Well, we have to go put a lot of money into content. That all makes sense. So you go and you do the same thing that YouTube did 2 years ago and say, we've got a lot of money. Who wants to spend it for us? Hearst is, on the list of 25 companies that will happily spend their money. I am a big doubter on Go90 right now, but I'm not a doubter that someone's going to make a bunch of mistakes, learn something, and figure out what the new medium is. And there's a lot to be said for the broad thing. So they're putting money in, and what do they call it? Vice for red states?
Vice for red states.
I mean, that's
by the way, I didn't know Vice was for blue states, so that's new information.
But it has a certain, Williamsburg tinge to it, don't you think?
It's bluish.
Yes. And, it cares about, starving people and stuff. It mostly cares about sex, drugs, and rock and roll and starving people and a lot of things that go boom. But, AOL.com was always a red state property, at least in the time I was there. the people who stuck with AOL, got their news from Fox News. And which is why the Huffington Post acquisition was an interesting challenge, but they also tried to keep AOL and have it both ways. And I don't know how well they've succeeded. So there's a little bit of AOL behind that, or at least in sync with that idea. Verizon said a couple of other things that were interesting on their earnings call, right? They were asked about Go90, and the only thing they would say about how well it's doing is 2 million downloads, which is neither big nor small, but as they themselves said, it's not relevant. All that matters is how many people use it and how often do they use it, and they weren't really saying that. They also said they don't expect to break even for 2 years, which makes sense to me, but, they were trying to sound committed for the long term.
And keep in mind, they're talking about spending $1 billion in content this year. So let's presume that next year is another billion something. That means they're prepared to put $2 billion at risk before it turns the corner. That's, that's not an insignificant, check.
Right. It's like 6-7 days worth of cell phone bills or something.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
It's right. I mean, and they could have easily spent that going and buying somebody, right? I mean, they could buy CBS if they felt like it, right? And they shouldn't feel like it, and they don't feel like it. At least not without trying to build it themselves. So it makes sense, except when you watch it, right? It's easy to talk about. But the other thing...
Hold on. So let's not leave that hanging. So you're saying you watched it and found it to be dreadful?
I did. I periodically turn it on, and it's hard to find something about whatever I want. Even if I try and channel, a teenager or a 20-something, the navigation makes no sense. All it is are these sort of chipper people who look like they're on infomercials, right? There's a style of TV anchoring that rings to my ear so false and so different than what you see on YouTube, right? YouTube, the stuff that works are people who have, something to say. They're not just hosts. And it was, it made no sense to me. Now,
but hold on. But let's dig into that, because here's the distinction that's really important. No one who's making content for YouTube is an employee. They're not working for the man. They're not punching the Google clock. They're not, these are people in their living rooms or dens or garages or with their handheld cameras out in the world making stuff for themselves, trying to become popular, famous, rich, loved, whatever metric they want to use. But the reason you're getting a unique voice on that service is because those are all people doing it with themselves as their boss. So now you're Verizon, and you say, well, we want to buy us some of that, and you call somebody who's down the road at YouTube and say, listen, however much you're making being your own boss, doing that kooky video game thing, we'll double it if you come, sit in our green screen studio and do that for us. And some people say yes, and those people that you're describing as hosts are the people but they're talent, right? They're not. The reason that it's not authentic is because it's not authentic.
So we have this world, right, where you look at YouTube and you say, the people who do what you describe in the economic and cultural context that you just described, some small percentage of them resonate with tens of millions of people. And that has an equilibrium. You can say, people are watching lots of that. We have the moment where there's Game of Thrones and all the stuff on Netflix, and Hollywood professionals given lots of money and creative license, and the very same people who watch PewDiePie are watching Game of Thrones because there's a certain integrity to the Hollywood thing. But there is no evidence in favor, and lots of evidence, again, if you hire Hollywood people to make YouTube, you have Frankenstein TV and nobody likes it. And if Verizon looked at what happened when YouTube put $100 million into content 2 years ago, they might not have gone and hired and invested in the same Frankenstein. Now, again, just because you make a mistake the first year doesn't mean you're going to. So what did YouTube do? They doubled down on the people who actually made sense. And, so they're Verizon, if you spend $1 billion, something might be good, right? If you have any understanding of the investment benefit of diversification. So just because we're 3 months into it, and when I hit the stuff that comes up on the front screen and I want to tear my hair out, that doesn't mean that they're never going to have something good. And it'll be it's always something you don't expect, except if you're Netflix, in which case you can predict it all perfectly. Before we leave Verizon, we should talk about some of the challenges and successes that they're having with their custom TV, right? So the low end...
You're talking about Fios.
On Fios, right, is instead of buying just a small bundle of 100 channels like the low end used to be, you now get to pick 2 of 6 mini bundles of 10 channels each around this, that, and the other thing, sports, news. And they're saying, was it a third or 40% of their new signups are picking this package? But they also cryptically said they're going to have to change it to comply with their legal contracts, which means...
This means they got sued.
Well, it means they got threatened,
yeah.
presumably by Disney, because what this allowed was that, everybody at the basic channel could have ESPN. They didn't all have to take ESPN, and not everybody wants ESPN, right? So, and ESPN, as we've talked about a bunch, is the biggest chunk of cost in delivering programming on cable. And so they'll, negotiations ensue. In this particular case, the consumer is the loser, right? If I took that $8 that's going, or $9 or whatever it is that's going to ESPN, and bought $8 worth of other channels I'd rather watch, I could buy 25 channels that I might want to watch.
So we got an interesting mailer the other day. We're Time Warner cable subscribers in New York, and we got a mailer from Time Warner saying, we know you get our internet service, but you don't currently get cable. For $9 a month, we'll get you 20 channels, all your broadcast channels, and we'll give you a free Roku box. Interesting.
Time Warner was one of the leaders in using Roku as a cable box. So $9, of course, going to $40 after you forget about it.
So I nibbled at it. I thought about it for a moment, because we currently take all of our off-air stuff and bring it to a TiVo box. And then when I dug into it, what I realized is the one thing I'd be losing, I'd be getting better quality signal from my local broadcasters, which I'd like, but I'd lose the DVR capacity because Roku, it isn't recording anything. It's basically, we're back to live tuner record, no, and there's no way. We tried to figure out if there was a way to take the signal from off air through the Roku into TiVo, and the answer is, of course, there isn't. So, a swing and a miss. I'm not sure who they'll get back, but maybe some people,
I mean, I'll bet you that you go from antenna to
TiVo,
right? So, I'll bet you that's a pretty low usage scenario.
Yeah, in part because Romeo, the box that we do it on, was marketed so inconsistently, and you had to go to Best Buy and find it out of the back of the store. It's a wonderful little $50 off-air recording box, but it's
$50 and it has a hard drive.
It does, but it also has a $14 a month TiVo subscription.
And All I know is Verizon keeps raising its prices. They're trying. I mean, they've introduced a cloud DVR, which is, of course, a fabulous function. You shouldn't have to think of it as a DVR. You should just be able to watch any show you want, but for various legal reasons, you have to ask to record it in advance, but you can have 12 simultaneous things recorded in the cloud, but it costs like $30 a month. And I went, and a friend of mine was trying to sign up for internet service, and we were looking at what the options were out here. And Verizon doesn't even sell broadband less than 50 megabits at $50 a month, which I think is their indication that anybody new coming to the market is likely to be a cord cutter, so they have to charge all the money they want to charge in the internet bundle, because they're not necessarily going to sell a programming and a telephone bundle.
I'm not feeling terribly sad for their future, but I tiny little violin playing, you know. But before we run out of time, a little transaction last week that didn't get noticed by a lot of people, which is why I love to make sure you and I talk about it. IBM, you remember those guys, you know, Big Blue.
It's a very good marketing company.
Made an announcement that they were committed to cloud video, and they were putting an enormous amount of capital, and they're buying companies, and they started by buying Ustream for the rumor number was $130 million, which is, given the fact that YouTube has a free streaming product and Facebook has a streaming product and live stream is out there, I'd love to know how Ustream convinced IBM that there was $130 million worth of value there.
What do you think their business is? I mean, what is actually going on at Ustream this year?
I don't know, to be honest, because I lost track of it after Twitch, but I think they probably do more, you've got a corporate event and you need to stream it live kind of stuff. I should probably know that, and I don't, actually. But the consumer piece of that business, dialed down.
I mean, IBM should be in the hosting corporate webcast business. That makes sense. Whether they needed to pay $130 million to do that, I don't know. Is it really $130 million? People have all kinds of reasons for throwing numbers out to reporters about acquisition prices. I do know, I looked at that market a little bit and discovered that a huge market is puppy cams and gerbil cams. And I made fun of this at one point at a family event, and my very smart sister said, I love puppy cams. Sometimes when I just need to chill out, I'm going to turn on and watch some cute animal for an hour.
My wife became very enamored with an eagle nest and spent a lot of time watching eagle hatchlings a couple of years ago. So
I don't know why anybody hasn't monitored. It's like the Red Bull eagle nest, the Coca-Cola puppy cam. There's something very primal about the desire to cuddle animals. Yeah.
There's a lot of pandas in the snow this weekend, so yes, I understand. And then the last thing, which is only tangentially involved in hacking TV, but has enough of overlapping friends that I wanted to just do a shout out, is, IndieWire is an extraordinary group. We know them from their founding. They're focused on the indie film business. They were they were originally independent, and then they sold to Snag Films. Ted Leonsis. And were there for a number of years, and they just this last week did a transaction to be acquired by Penske Media, which may be not a firm a lot of our viewers, listeners are aware of, but Penske owns Variety, they own Women's Wear Daily, they own Hollywood Life. They're really growing in the digital publishing space and the physical publishing space, particularly around Hollywood and media, and I think IndieWire is a great acquisition for them.
it makes sense for Penske, no question. Snag Films was an interesting outfit. They were trying to, at various points, fund documentary makers through various advertising models and trying to help documentary makers, format their stuff and distribute it in a digital world. Have you followed them at all? Is there a reason why they're going through a shift and would want to bail out on IndieWire?
They're in the midst of going through a change. They're relaunching as an SVOD technology company. I think, everyone's trying to figure out where the revenue is, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Well, they've been trying to do advertising supported documentaries forever. So if they're saying we want to be fee-based, subscription-based, that's an interesting data point.
Yeah, no, it's not that as I understand it, it's not that they want to be subscription-based. It's literally that they're going from running their own service to pivoting to providing technology the name is ViewLift. And ViewLift is a SaaS-based platform that allow publishers to do SVOD. That's as much as I know.
Competing maybe with the new IBM and, with MLB Advanced Media, and, that's a real market to a point. And
with that, we are out of time. So we will see you again, and we will be back a week from today, hopefully in warmer weather. And we'll have news out of Sundance, which we'll report. Plus, maybe I do think let's pick something to watch, and then we'll talk about it next week. What should it be? Do we want to dive into Go 90 more, or or maybe we should watch Watchable, which is the undiscussed alternative on Comcast, or Twitch. Twitch has all these new, craft channels we could check out. Let's pick one. Well, you know what? We won't decide on the podcast. We'll decide offline, but we will be back next week. And we will tweet out to our many follower what we're going to have, and we'll have a listening party, and we can all talk about it together. Sounds good. Have a great week. Okay, you too.